The emergency klaxons screamed across the Galactic Council's monitoring station as senior analyst Zix Thala watched her screens with growing horror. The human vessel Times, linebacker Times, had just transmitted 3 words that made every alien species in the known galaxy break into a cold sweat. Hold my beer. Line. Oh. Hold. My beer. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel, staring at the massive crystalline entity that had appeared from the void between dimensions. The thing was roughly the size of Earth's moon, pulsing with malevolent energy that made reality itself ripple around its edges. Behind her, the bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, while maintaining the practiced calm that had made humanity famous across 17 star systems. Ma'am, the entity has destroyed 3 Catherian dreadnoughts in the past hour, reported Lieutenant Torres, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Their plasma cannons barely scratched it. The Vorthan Empire's quantum torpedoes had no effect either. Chen nodded slowly, her mind already racing through possibilities that would have terrified most species. Humans had earned their reputation in the galaxy, not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through an alarming tendency to attempt the impossible when faced with insurmountable odds. Other species planned for centuries before attempting anything dangerous. Humans looked at danger and asked, "But what if we tried it anyway?" "Sir, we're receiving transmissions from the Joint Fleet," called out Communications Officer Park. "Admiral Kretak of the Hegemony is requesting all vessels maintain safe distance while they formulate a strategic withdrawal." Withdrawal? Chen raised an eyebrow. The entity had already consumed 2 inhabited systems, turning billions of lives into pure energy to fuel its passage into their dimension. Each system it devoured made it stronger. And there were 47 more populated worlds in its direct path. On the monitoring station, Zix Thala's tentacles writhed in agitation as she watched the human ship's telemetry. The Times linebacker Times was not retreating. Instead, it was moving closer to the entity, its engines burning at maximum output. She quickly activated her communication array to contact the Galactic Defense Network. "This is Monitor Station 7 Alpha," she transmitted on the emergency frequency. "We have a Code Amber situation developing in the Kepler 442 system. The humans are exhibiting pre-beer, holding behavioral patterns." The response was immediate and panicked. Admiral Voss's Kran of the Altarian Republic's voice crackled through the speakers. "Confirm Code Amber. Are you absolutely certain? Have they actually said the phrase?" "Affirmative." Direct quote. "Hold my beer. Threat level is upgrading to Code Red. Throughout the galaxy, ancient emergency protocols activated." The phrase, "Hold my beer," had been added to the Galactic Emergency Lexicon after what became known as the Proxima Incident, when a human mining crew had decided to see what happens if they detonated a controlled fusion device inside an unstable wormhole. The result had accidentally created a new form of FTL travel, but not before giving every xenobiologist in 3 sectors a nervous breakdown. Back on the Times linebacker Asterisk, Chen studied the tactical display with the intensity of a chess master examining a particularly complex endgame. The entity wasn't just consuming matter and energy. It was unraveling the fundamental structure of space-time itself. Conventional weapons were useless because they relied on physical laws that the entity could simply ignore. "Lieutenant Torres," she said calmly, "I need you to contact engineering and tell them to prepare the resonance cascade generator." Torres blinked. "Ma'am, that system is still experimental. The simulations show a 93% chance of catastrophic failure if we attempt to use it outside of controlled laboratory conditions. And what's the probability of success against the entity using conventional methods?" 0%, ma'am. "Then I like our odds." Chen turned to face her crew, noting the mixture of excitement and terror in their eyes. This was the moment when humans typically did something that would either save the day or create an entirely new category of disaster. "Mr. Park, please transmit a message to the Joint Fleet. Human vessel Times, Linebacker times attempting unconventional solution. Recommend all ships maintain minimum safe distance of 50,000 kilometers. Ma'am, Park hesitated. What should I tell them we're planning to do? Chen smiled, the kind of smile that had made humanity's reputation for cheerful insanity legendary across the galaxy. Tell them we're going to try turning it off and on again. The resonance cascade generator had been developed by Dr. Elizabeth Hawkins, a theoretical physicist who had spent her career asking questions like, what if we could make reality hiccup? The device was designed to create localized disruptions in the quantum foam that underlies all existence, essentially forcing the universe to perform an emergency restart in a very small area. On paper, it was brilliant. In practice, it had never been tested on anything larger than a laboratory mouse, which had briefly existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously before returning to normal and spending the rest of the day staring at things that weren't there. Chief Engineer Rodriguez's voice came through the comm system. Captain, I've got the cascade generator spinning up, but I want it on record that this is either going to be the most spectacular success in human history or the most spectacular failure. Possibly both. Probably. Noted, Chief. How long until you're ready? Give me 10 minutes to convince the universe that what we're about to do makes sense. Chen watched as the entity continued its slow but inexorable advance toward the inner system. Each pulse of its crystalline structure sent waves of distortion through space, making the stars themselves flicker. The joint fleet of 12 species had formed a defensive line, but their weapons might as well have been throwing stones at a hurricane. Ma'am, Torres reported, Admiral Kretak is demanding to know our intentions. He's threatening to classify us as a rogue vessel if we don't fall back to the perimeter. Inform the Admiral that we're implementing Solution 7. Torres paused, checking his tactical database. Ma'am, there is no Solution 7 in the book. Exactly. That's why it might work. The beauty of human military doctrine, Chen reflected, was its fundamental flexibility. Other species had elaborate battle plans that accounted for every possible scenario. Humans had elaborate battle plans too, but they also had a backup protocol that essentially amounted to, when all else fails, try something nobody expects. Captain. Rodriguez's voice carried a note of excitement, mixed with barely controlled panic. We're ready down here. Fair warning, though. When I activate this thing, every sensor in the fleet is going to think the laws of physics just called in sick. Do it, Chief. The Times linebacker times began to vibrate as the resonance cascade generator reached full power. On monitoring stations throughout the sector, alien scientists watched in fascination and horror as the human ship's energy signature began fluctuating in ways that violated several fundamental laws of thermodynamics. The entity seemed to notice the disturbance. Its pulsing slowed, and the massive crystalline structure began to orient itself toward the approaching human vessel. Energy discharges that could have vaporized a small moon lanced out toward the Times linebacker asterisk. But each beam bent around the ship as local space-time hiccuped and forgot how to properly conduct destructive energy. Cascade generator at maximum output, Rodriguez reported. Reality is getting very confused in our immediate vicinity. Chen gripped her command chair as the ship shuddered. Through the view screen, she could see the entity looming larger, its surface crawling with patterns that hurt to look at directly. Mr. Torres. Plot a collision course. Ma'am? You heard me. Take us right down its throat. This was the moment when human unpredictability reached its peak. Any other species would have attempted to fire the cascade generator from a safe distance, hoping to disrupt the entity without risking their own vessel. Humans, however, had learned through painful experience that sometimes the only way to solve a problem was to get uncomfortably close to it and see what happened. As the Times linebacker times accelerated toward what appeared to be certain destruction, Zeke-Thala transmitted one final message to the Galactic Defense Network. Code Black. The humans have achieved full beer-holding status. May the universe have mercy on us all. Way. 84. 84 Way P. Everyone. Way Peace. The entity's surface rushed toward them, reality bending and twisting as two incompatible forms of physics prepared to meet head-on. In the final seconds before impact, Chen had time for one last thought. This was either going to work spectacularly, or it was going to fail so catastrophically that they'd need to invent new words to describe it. Either way, it was going to be one hell of a ride. The moment the linebacker times made contact with the entity's crystalline surface, the universe experienced what Chief Engineer Rodriguez would later describe as the cosmic equivalent of choking on a pretzel. The resonance cascade generator didn't just disrupt local space-time. It created a feedback loop that made reality itself double take. From the perspective of the Joint Fleet, watching from their supposedly safe distance of 50,000 kilometers, the human vessel simply vanished. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but gone in a way that violated basic causality. One moment it was there, accelerating towards certain doom, and the next moment, the space it had occupied contained nothing but a faint shimmer that made their instruments emit confused beeping sounds. The entity stopped mid-pulse. For the first time since emerging from whatever nightmarish dimension it called home, the crystalline horror simply froze. Its surface, which had been crawling with patterns of malevolent energy, went dark. The reality-distorting emissions that had been tearing holes in space-time ceased entirely. Even its forward motion stopped, leaving it hanging motionless in the void, like a massive geometric puzzle, missing a crucial piece. Admiral Kretak of the Hegemony stared at his tactical display in disbelief. Where did they go? Sensors show no debris, no energy signature, no trace of the human vessel at all. His science officer, a nervous Catherian named Vex Modal, frantically worked at his console. Sir, I'm detecting massive quantum fluctuations at the entity's core. It's as if something is rewriting it from the inside. Inside the entity. If inside had any meaning in a place where geometry was more of a suggestion than a rule, the crew of the linebacker times found themselves in a very peculiar situation. The ship was intact, which was the good news. The bad news was that they were now existing in a space that seemed to be built from crystallized mathematics, and had no respect whatsoever for basic concepts like up or cause and effect. Chief, Captain Chen called over the comm system, which somehow still worked despite the fact that according to her instruments, they were currently located both everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Status report. Rodriguez's voice came back with the kind of forced calm that suggested he was dealing with something that would require years of therapy to fully process. Well, Captain, the good news is that the cascade generator worked exactly as designed. The bad news is that we're apparently inside the entity, which seems to be some kind of living mathematical construct from a dimension where physics works differently. Through the view screen, which showed a perspective that hurt to look at for too long, Chen could see the entity's internal structure. It was like being inside a vast crystal cave, except the crystals were made of pure information, and the walls occasionally shifted between being solid matter and abstract concepts like the color of hunger or the sound of falling mathematics. Dr. Yamamoto, Chen called to the ship's xenobiologist. What are we looking at here? Dr. Kenji Yamamoto, who had spent his career studying life forms that challenged conventional definitions of biology, was practically vibrating with excitement, despite their dire circumstances. Captain, this is incredible. The entity isn't just a creature from another dimension. It's a living equation, a form of mathematical life that exists by consuming reality and converting it into raw information. Can you be more specific? Think of it this way. We exist in a universe where matter and energy are the fundamental building blocks. This thing exists in a universe where information and mathematical relationships are the fundamental building blocks. When it enters our dimension, it has to consume our reality to sustain itself, like a fish out of water that needs to keep breathing water to survive. Lieutenant Torres, who had been monitoring their weapons systems, reported something that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. Ma'am, our photon torpedoes are still armed, but they're registering as ideas? The targeting computer is asking me to define the concept of enemy before it will allow me to fire. Chen rubbed her temples. This was definitely going on the list of situations they never covered in command school. The entity was paused, probably trying to process the presence of matter-based life forms in its information-based interior. But she knew they didn't have long before it adapted to their presence. Dr. Yamamoto, if this thing is essentially a living equation, is there a way to we can solve it? The xenobiologist's eyes lit up with an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. Given their current situation, Chen was hoping for both. Captain, every equation has a solution, and if we can't solve it directly, we might be able to carry the one. Explain. The cascade generator didn't just transport us inside the entity. It created a localized area where our physics and its physics are forced to coexist. We're like a variable that got introduced into the equation without warning. If we can manipulate our own physical properties, we might be able to create a mathematical contradiction that forces the equation to resolve itself. Chief Engineer Rodriguez's voice came through the comm with the tone of someone who was about to suggest something that would either save them all or create a new type of disaster. Captain, I think I know what the doc means. What if we overload our own systems in a very specific way? Create an impossible energy signature that the entity can't process? Define impossible. Well, theoretically, if I reroute power through the cascade generator, while simultaneously running every system on the ship at maximum output, we could create a feedback loop that generates more energy than we're actually producing. It's completely impossible, according to thermodynamics, which is exactly why it might work in here. Chen looked around the bridge at her crew. Torres was grinning with the expression of someone who had decided that if they were going to die, they might as well die doing something interesting. Dr. Yamamoto was frantically taking notes on phenomena that would revolutionize xenobiology if they lived to publish them. Even the normally cautious navigation officer, Kim, was nodding with enthusiasm. Do it, Chen decided. If we're going to break the universe, let's break it thoroughly. Outside the entity, the joint fleet watched in amazement as the massive crystalline structure began to flicker. Not physically, but conceptually, as if the universe couldn't decide whether it should exist or not. Energy readings fluctuated between impossibly high and negative infinity, while temporal sensors suggested that the entity was experiencing all moments of its existence simultaneously. Admiral Kretak opened a channel to his fellow commanders. I'm going to ask this once, and I want honest answers. Does anyone have any idea what the humans are doing in there? Admiral Voss's Kran of the Altarian Republic responded with the weary tone of someone who had dealt with human solutions before. My best guess? They're probably trying to divide by 0. 17.7. That's impossible. Admiral, in the past 50 years, humans have made faster-than-light travel possible by convincing space that distance is optional, created artificial gravity by asking nicely, and solved the energy crisis by building reactors that run on pure stubbornness. I wouldn't put anything past them at this point. Inside the entity, Rodriguez was discovering that impossible engineering was surprisingly straightforward once you stopped worrying about whether it should work and focused on whether it could work. Captain, I've got every system on the ship running at 110% efficiency, which shouldn't be possible. But the cascade generator is apparently convincing our power cores that math is more of a guideline than a rule. The ship began to vibrate, but not in any physical sense. Instead, it was vibrating conceptually, existing in a state of quantum uncertainty that made the entity's own mathematical structure. Hiccup. Dr. Yamamoto watched his instruments with the fascination of a scientist witnessing the birth of an entirely new field of study. Captain, the entity is trying to process our existence, but we're creating logical paradoxes faster than it can resolve them. It's like we're a computer virus in the form of matter. Chen felt the ship shudder as reality around them began to protest their presence more vigorously. The crystalline walls were shifting color rapidly, cycling through spectrums that didn't technically exist. How long can we maintain this? Unknown, ma'am, Rodriguez replied. We're basically asking the universe to carry the one in a calculation that doesn't have a one to carry. Eventually, either we're going to break the entity's ability to process information, or we're going to break mathematics itself. And if we break mathematics, well, Captain, that would be a first for humanity. But knowing us, we'd probably find a way to fix it with duct tape and ingenuity. Through the view screen, they could see the entity's internal structure beginning to collapse. Not physically, but informationally. The mathematical relationships that held it together were unraveling as they tried to account for the presence of matter-based life that insisted on existing in ways that made no sense according to information-based physics. Suddenly, the comm system crackled to life with an alien voice speaking in harmonics that bypassed their universal translators and spoke directly to their minds. The entity was trying to communicate. What are you? The voice was like the sound of equations solving themselves, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Chen keyed the comm system, hoping their response would make it through the barrier between matter-based and information-based existence. We're humans. We're really good at being impossible. You violate causality. Yeah, we get that a lot. Look, we don't want to hurt you, but you're kind of eating our reality. And we'd prefer if you stopped. There was a pause that lasted either several seconds or several centuries, depending on which temporal reference frame you were using. When the entity spoke again, its voice carried what might have been confusion, or possibly respect. You propose. Chen looked at her crew, then at the impossible readings on her instruments, then at the crystalline structure that was slowly but steadily unraveling around them. How about this? We'll show you a dimension where information-based life can exist without consuming reality-based life. Think of it as a cosmic timeshare arrangement. The solution, as it turned out, was breathtakingly simple, in the way that only human solutions could be. While the greatest minds in the galaxy had been trying to figure out how to destroy the entity or force it back to its home dimension, Captain Chen proposed something that had never occurred to anyone else, giving it what it actually needed. Chief Rodriguez, she called over the comm, I need you to do something that's probably going to sound completely insane, even by our current standards. At this point, Captain, I'm pretty much immune to surprise. What do you need? Can you modify the cascade generator to create a stable pocket dimension? Something like a dimensional bubble, where information-based physics can coexist with reality-based physics without one consuming the other. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, and Chen could almost hear him thinking through the implications. Theoretically? Yes. Absolutely. The cascade generator is already creating localized space-time distortions. If I could fine-tune the quantum resonance frequencies and create a stable harmonic between dimensional barriers. Captain, this is either going to be the greatest breakthrough in dimensional physics since the discovery of hyperspace, or it's going to create a black hole made of pure mathematics. What are the odds? Honestly? About 50-50. But given our current situation, those are pretty good odds. Dr. Yamamoto looked up from his console with excitement. Captain, if this works, we wouldn't just be solving the immediate crisis. We'd be creating the first stable interdimensional habitat in known galactic history. The scientific implications alone. Doc, Chen interrupted gently. One universe-breaking discovery at a time. The entity had been listening to their conversation with what passed for patience among living equations. When it spoke again, its voice carried harmonics that their translation software interpreted as cautious hope. This pocket dimension would permit sustainable existence. Think of it as your own private universe, Chen explained. A place where you can exist according to information-based physics without having to convert matter-based reality to sustain yourself. Like having your own apartment instead of having to crash on someone else's couch and eat all their food. The analogy seemed to translate reasonably well, despite the fundamental differences between species that existed as flesh and blood versus species that existed as living mathematics. The entity's crystalline structure shifted, patterns flowing across its surface in ways that Dr. Yamamoto's instruments suggested might be the information-based equivalent of excited nodding. We accept this proposal. But how? Chen turned to Rodriguez. Chief, you're up. What followed was possibly the most complex engineering project in galactic history, made all the more impressive by the fact that it was being performed inside an interdimensional mathematical entity, while reality itself was having an existential crisis. Rodriguez had to modify the cascade generator on the fly, rerouting power through systems that weren't designed to handle interdimensional physics, while simultaneously maintaining the impossibly high energy output that was keeping them alive in a space where matter wasn't supposed to exist. Captain, he reported, I'm going to need to essentially turn our entire ship into a reality anchor. Every system, every circuit, every component is going to have to work together to create a stable dimensional interface. It's like trying to build a bridge between the concept of blue and the number 7. Will it work? Captain, I'm about to attempt to create a pocket universe using a starship, some very confused physics, and what I can only describe as weaponized optimism. Ask me in 10 minutes whether it worked. Outside the entity, the joint fleet watched as energy readings spiked to levels that made their instruments file formal complaints. Space around the crystalline structure began to ripple. Not with the malevolent distortions they had seen before, but with something that looked almost organized. Admiral Kretok opened a channel to monitor Station 7-7 Alpha. Zixthala's voice came back with the tone of someone who was beginning to suspect that her instruments were playing an elaborate practical joke on her. Admiral, according to my readings, the humans are currently in the process of creating a stable pocket dimension using their ship as a dimensional anchor. This should be completely impossible. Should be? Well, it should be impossible. But the energy signatures suggest they're actually succeeding. The probability calculations keep coming back as error, math overflow. And what does that mean? It means the humans have officially broken my computer's ability to calculate how impossible what they're doing actually is. Inside the entity, the process of creating a pocket dimension was both more complex and more straightforward than anyone had expected. Complex, because it required maintaining quantum coherence across multiple dimensional barriers, while simultaneously preventing reality from collapsing into a singularity of confused physics. Straightforward because, as Rodriguez discovered, the universe was surprisingly cooperative once you explained to it what you were trying to accomplish. Captain, the cascade generator is holding steady, and I'm detecting the formation of what I can only describe as a reality bubble, he reported. It's about 10 kilometers in diameter and expanding slowly. Inside the bubble, information-based and matter-based physics are coexisting in stable harmony. Dr. Yamamoto was practically bouncing in his chair as he watched the readings. Captain, this is incredible. The dimensional interface is creating a space where both types of physics can operate simultaneously without interference. The entity can exist in its natural information-based state, while matter-based life can visit without being converted to pure energy. The entity's voice, when it came, carried harmonics that their translation software interpreted as wonder, gratitude, and something that might have been the mathematical equivalent of tears of joy. This space is perfect. We can exist without consumption, without destruction. Chen smiled, feeling the satisfaction that came from solving a problem in the most human way possible, by refusing to accept that it couldn't be solved. Chief, can you transfer the dimensional anchor technology to the bubble itself? Make it self-sustaining? Already on it, Captain. The beautiful thing about this setup is that once the pocket dimension is stable, it generates its own dimensional coherence. It's like a perpetual motion machine, except instead of violating thermodynamics, it's creating its own localized physics, where thermodynamics work differently. The transfer process took another 20 minutes, during which the crew of the Times, linebacker Times, worked with the focused intensity of people who knew they were making history. When it was complete, they found themselves back in normal space, their ship floating next to a shimmering distortion that looked like a soap bubble made of crystallized starlight. The entity, meanwhile, had undergone a remarkable transformation. No longer the malevolent crystalline horror that had been consuming entire star systems. It now appeared as a beautiful geometric structure that pulsed with gentle, warm light. Its reality-distorting emissions had been replaced by what Dr. Yamamoto's instruments described as happy quantum fluctuations. "We are grateful," the entity transmitted. "Our species has wandered dimensions for eons, seeking sustainable existence. You have given us home." Chen opened a channel to the joint fleet. "Admiral Kritak, this is Captain Chen. Crisis resolved. The entity now has its own pocket dimension and will no longer need to consume matter-based reality for sustenance." Quote, 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 quote. There was a long pause before Kritak responded. "Captain Chen, did you just solve an interdimensional crisis by creating a new universe? More like a new neighborhood in an existing universe, but essentially yes. And this was your plan all along? Admiral, if I've learned anything in my career, it's that humans work best when we're making things up as we go along. We had the tools to create localized space-time distortions. We had an entity that needed a place to exist. And we had a problem that couldn't be solved by conventional methods. Sometimes the solution is to stop trying to destroy the problem and start trying to accommodate it." The aftermath of what became known as the Kepler Pocket Dimension Incident was felt throughout the galaxy. The technology that Rodriguez had developed during the crisis led to breakthroughs in dimensional physics, interdimensional communication, and what the scientific community termed applied impossibility. The pocket dimension itself became a marvel of galactic cooperation, with research stations established nearby to study the unique physics that existed within. The entity, which eventually chose to be known as the Axiom Collective, became humanity's first truly alien ally. Their ability to exist as living information proved invaluable in solving complex mathematical problems, while human creativity and adaptability helped them explore concepts that had been beyond their purely logical perspective. Most importantly, the phrase "hold my beer" was officially upgraded in the Galactic Emergency Lexicon from a code red threat indicator to a code gold miracle in progress notification. Emergency protocols were revised to include a new category: situations where humans were about to attempt something impossible and would probably succeed despite all rational expectations. Zixthala, who had monitored the entire incident from beginning to end, submitted her final report to the Galactic Council with a recommendation that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. After careful analysis of the Kepler incident, it is this analyst's recommendation that when humans begin exhibiting pre-beer holding behavior, rather than implementing emergency evacuation procedures, we should instead prepare to document whatever miracle they're about to accidentally create. Based on current data, the probability of humans solving seemingly impossible problems through sheer audacious creativity has reached statistical significance. The report concluded with a note that would become famous throughout the galaxy. Humans do not solve problems the way other species do. They do not calculate optimal solutions or develop elaborate strategic plans. Instead, they look at impossible situations and ask, "But what if we tried anyway?" This approach should not work. The fact that it consistently does work suggests that humans may have somehow convinced the universe that logic is optional. 6 months after the incident, Captain Chen received a message from the Axiom Collective. It was transmitted not through conventional communication arrays, but through a quantum resonance pattern that made her coffee cup briefly exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously. "Chen Captain, we have learned human expression. Thank you for holding our beer." Chen laughed, raising her mug in a toast to her impossible crew and their equally impossible universe. After all, Someone had to be responsible for keeping reality interesting.